Now that is how semi-final rugby should be. Congratulations to Leinster and commiserations to Northampton, who fought valiantly until the very end. Today, we'll be analysing how Leinster managed to get such a dominant start in the first half. Then, we'll be looking at how Northampton managed to contain Leinster despite their possession before nearly causing a massive upset towards the end. Before we get started, I would just like to mention that I have a Patreon where you can find this game's notes, so if you'd be interested in supporting the channel, then you can do that there. Leinster were extremely dominant for most of the game, not just in the opening quarter. By halftime, Northampton had 0 entries into Leinster's 22, while Leinster spent 40% of their possession time in Northampton's 22. So it's no wonder that the Irish managed to get such a strong lead early on. One thing that was very clear was that Leinster wanted to attack with a lot of width and with a lot of speed. They ended the game with a massive 243 passes and 159 carries. Northampton also had to make 210 tackles throughout the match, which would have undoubtedly had a big effect on their fitness towards the end. Let's take this period just before halftime to illustrate Leinster's approach on attack. Leinster kicked short on the restart with strong competition in the air, and they managed to turn the ball over. Van der Fleer carries to within Northampton's 22, giving Leinster great attacking momentum. The ruck, Leinster wants to bait Northampton's defenders into folding towards the open side before striking on the blind with Byrne. They want to do this by making McCarthy and Nash run to the opposite side, but Northampton don't get fooled. Meaning that when Byrne folds around, there are more than enough defenders on this side of the field. The next phase, we can see that Leinster sets up their structure to attack very flat. Furlong receives before giving it to Byrne, who distributes to Porter, who gets tackled behind the gain line. At the next phase, they run a blocker pattern with Byrne and Henshaw. Henshaw receives and gives it to the inside to McCarthy, who then offloads it back to Henshaw in contact. Leinster don't score in this period of play, but hopefully it illustrates their focus on distribution and speed. While Leinster completely dominated the territory and possession stats, they still only managed to score 3 tries in total. The reason for this was because Northampton's defence was really solid during this match. A few phases on from the period we just looked at, we can see that Leinster are still only just beyond the 22. Here, Tyke Furlong receives and gives it to Byrne out the back. Notice how Northampton are doing very well to stay square here and prioritising strong connections over line speed. After another phase, Leinster shifts it wide to McCarthy, who takes it in. Both Saints players tackle him below the sternum, and being as tall as he is, it means that he can give an offload. One phase on, Furlong takes it in, but gets stopped in his tracks as Graham makes an excellent tackle by planting both his feet into the ground and Finn Smith going high. The following phase, Leinster folds over and Northampton don't react quickly enough. However, instead of panicking, they decide to go into a strong drift and manage to tackle Leinster only a few meters behind the gain line. Northampton managed to set a defensive line, and after a few high-intensity phases from Leinster, they managed to cause an error and deny their opponents an important try. The drawback to this focus on dominant hits for Northampton was the fact that it allowed Leinster to get more opportunities to offload and for quicker ruck speeds. Another area which Leinster exploited well was the backfield, specifically the right wing. Northampton made some errors here and had lapses in concentration that gave Leinster easy opportunities to move up the field. In the 7th minute of the match, Leinster are on the attack in Northampton's half. When Leinster spreads the ball wide to the open side, we can see that Hendy is coming into the defensive line out wide, with Mitchell and Ram covering the backfield. This is what's called the pendulum defense, and it allows teams to continuously cover the backfield depending on where the position of the ball is. If the ball is in the center of the field, then ideally both players on the wing will be positioned slightly deep, with the fullback covering deep kicks. If the ball moves to either side of the field, then the winger will adjust by shooting up into the defensive line. The fullback will then cover the space left by the winger, and the opposite winger will drop back to cover the space left by the fullback. When Leinster goes to the blind again, Mitchell shoots up when the ball enters the 50-meter line. Ram would then be covering the wing here and prevent a kick, but he fails to adjust quickly enough. Jamison Gibson Park immediately spots the opportunity and exploits the space left by Mitchell. Northampton are under huge pressure and they are forced to make a less than stellar exit. Northampton's approach to attack in this game was to target Leinster on the counter and in strike moves. I believe that their latter approach was partly the reason for their high amount of knock-ons throughout the match. In this period of play, Mitchell is looking to box kick. His kick is absolutely pinpoint to just outside Leinster's 22. Unfortunately for them, they don't have many strong chasers to put Leinster under pressure, and it allows Nash to give it to Lowe, who clears very deep. Furbank takes it and immediately looks to counter to the opposite side of Leinster's forwards. Leinster do well to shift, but Saints still manage to find space on the outside. Ram tracks back, but unfortunately doesn't do so quickly enough to join the counter. When Freeman is forced to make a quick pass to the outside, Ram is slowed down and loses it in contact. Another example is here in the 36th minute. Northampton are looking to attack on the blind, and Smith spots some space just behind the defensive line. He puts in a short kick and Nash gathers, who gets tackled close to the touchline. Leinster then exits very deep, and even though Mitchell drops the ball backwards, Northampton still decides to counter. They attack the opposite side of the field once again, but this time there are two forwards in the defensive line. Instead of drifting, all three of these forwards press, and Henshaw doesn't put enough pressure on Smith. Smith gives a skip pass and puts Dingwall in a lot of space. While Jamison Gibson Park closes the gap, it still leaves a ton of space in behind, and Dingwall exploits it with a chip kick. Leinster then puts in a very good exit to just outside the 22, but it put them under a huge amount of pressure with a big amount of risk. Leinster's defence, on the other hand, focused on more double tackles with strong competition on the ground. This had the knock-on effect of taking away a core strength of Northampton, as both strike moves and counter-attacks rely on speed to be effective. There was, however, a weakness to their defence as well. We can see this in the 38th minute of the game. Jacques Nienaber has brought in a defensive system not unlike the Springboks used during the World Cup. The idea is that they want to aggressively shut down the attack by shooting up and taking the initiative, rather than suffocate and snuff out the attack over time. The outside defenders are the ones responsible for making the decision on whether or not to shoot up or to drift. It's really important that all these defenders make the correct decisions, otherwise the defensive system can break down very easily. Here, Northampton are attacking from quite deep and want to spread the ball wide. Also notice that Dingwall is positioned behind Smith, which gives Northampton an extra option for a stack attack. Coles takes the ball and Moon runs a very good supporting line just outside of him. This draws in Osborne, who would be covering Finn Smith in this position. Because the defensive line is so aggressive, none of the defenders outside of him has enough time to adjust to a drift defense. This means that a big gap opens up outside of Henshaw as Lowe is covering Freeman. Dingwall sees the gap and Smith gives him the ball, which creates a clean line break. Unfortunately for Northampton, they knock it on before they can score. The big takeaway from this is that this new defensive system that Jacques has brought into Leinster is highly technical and will take some time for them to get right. Many forget that the Springboks were leaking tries left and right when they first started using the system in 2018. It also needs to be worked on at turnover ball as well. Here, Leinster has a missed throw at the lineout, and Northampton are quick to pounce and regain possession. After a very quick ruck, Mitchell sends it to the backline with numbers on the outside. As I mentioned before, Leinster's defensive system requires a lot of accuracy, and the outside defenders are slightly too late to shoot up in the defensive line, meaning that they are only in line with the inside defenders. This wouldn't be a problem in a more conservative defensive system, but here, Frawley is already shooting up to cover Freeman. The result is that there just isn't enough time to cover the inside, and a massive gap opens up again. The outside defenders need to cut inside to cover the offload, and at the next ruck, a third of the field is undefended on the blind. James Lowe makes a good read and covers Hendy on the left wing, but it means that the backfield is now undefended. Hendy puts in a chip kick, and Porter as well as Nash have a miscommunication and the ball spills, leading to Hendy getting the try. In the final quarter of the match, Leinster were running out of steam. I think this was partly due to fitness, but also just the way the match momentum was swinging. Because they couldn't score more tries earlier in the match, they still weren't far ahead, and the game was still on to the very last minute. Leinster switched to a more kicking and territorial approach. They wanted to slow the game as much as they possibly could to close out the match. Yet, Northampton still managed to be threatening towards the very end. Overall, this was a very enjoyable match, and it was closer than many had anticipated. This also sets us up for a mouth-watering final, and I for one absolutely cannot wait.